So, very good morning, students. I know it's a Sunday, but first of all, I'd like to welcome you all. In today's webinar, we have Mr. Jayant here.
Hello. Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you. So just a brief introduction about sir. He is a PhD candidate in the Department of Electronics and Communication Engineering at the Ohio State University. He is an IIT Hyderabad alumnus, previously worked at Microsoft and the Bank of America, currently focused on research in distributed machine learning and generalizing the unseen data distributions and domain generalization and differential privacy. So, very good morning, sir. I would like to welcome you to the session. And are you able to share your screen?
Yeah, just let me try it. Yes, I hope.
Yes, I can
Just
see
a
your screen.
moment.
Can you
Okay.
also check you have access to the polls?
Let
So
me
it's
see.
right, like the second left option towards the screen share.
Okay, just a second. So the second, where is this?
Left.
Yeah, polls. Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay.
whenever.
Yeah. Great. Oh, all right. But I'm in my presentation view.
Yeah, whenever
So
you
if
want to
I
access
open,
it, you can do it.
okay. All right. All right. Then. So I'll get started.
Yes, sir, you can.
So, good morning, everyone. Thanks a lot for attending this talk on a Sunday. Firstly, I'd like to thank my friend Rajkumar, who is also working at Blackbuck Engineers, and also the founder, Miss Anuradha, for giving me this opportunity. And I hope you guys will enjoy the talk. So, a little bit about myself before we delve into this topic. As the moderator has told already, I completed my bachelor's from IIT Hyderabad. My interests during my bachelor's were mostly on signal processing and image processing, as I was fascinated about how our human visual system can perceive the world around us. And after my bachelor's, I worked for a year at Bank of America in Hyderabad, where I worked on data visualization. And after that, I started to explore more about my interests in understanding the visual system and so on. And then I embarked on a journey to the US to pursue a master's in ECE at the Ohio State University. So I started learning more about machine learning, computer vision, and also autonomous vehicles and self-driving technologies when I was during my doing my master's. So I interned at Ford in order to gain experience regarding the same. And after my master's, I worked for a brief duration at Aptiv, which designs perception technology for self-driving vehicles. So I designed lidar perception algorithms that enable the vehicles to see the world around the vehicle, detect the obstacles, track vehicles, pedestrians, etc. Uh, After my master's and after working for a while, I realized that my interests lie in understanding the fundamentals of machine learning, and that led me to go back to university and pursue a PhD in machine learning, where my current research interests are focused around federated learning, distributed machine learning, reinforcement learning. And I interned at Microsoft Bing Ads last summer, where I was working on deep learning algorithms. So this is a short intro about myself. Uh, so I want to gauge how well the audience is familiar with respect to the current topic of interest. So I'll first take a poll on the familiarity about the topic. So let how do I do that again? Mhm. Okay, got it. So the first poll, yeah. So how long should I wait for the poll?
So 1 minute would be sufficient, I think. You just
Okay,
launch the
great.
poll and wait for a minute.
Okay, got it.
more than a minute, it's like it will be like wasting time. So 1 minute would be sufficient.
Okay. All right, yeah. Okay, I see that around 75% of them voted. So I think we'll proceed from here. So I observe that most of the audience is not very familiar with machine learning or reinforcement learning, and it's interesting to see some of the students are actually aware of reinforcement learning, which is a very a good sign. So I'm expecting a very healthy interaction with you guys. So let's get started. Okay, so here's a brief overview of the talk. So we shall first talk about what is reinforcement learning and basically why do we need to care about reinforcement learning. And after that, we'll try to navigate the problem of reinforcement learning with the help of some examples in a way to understand the terminology in reinforcement learning. And once we do that, we'll repeatedly look at multiple examples in order to make our understanding much more clearer. After that, we will discuss a simplified problem, which is called the multi-arm bandits, before taking a look at the real-world applications of reinforcement learning. Once that is done, I'll give a brief overview of what is the skill set required in order to understand and pursue reinforcement learning, and also the possible career paths that are available in the corporate world. Currently, the positions are currently the business applications of reinforcement learning are pretty limited, but this is an emerging technology that is going to be very useful in the next 5 to 10 years. So I'd like to highlight the career paths that are available in this field. So sorry. Yeah. So before starting, I'd like to give a small disclaimer. The purpose of this talk is not to discuss reinforcement learning in depth or to explain the state of art research in reinforcement learning. The goal is to introduce RL to someone who is not familiar with the term or familiar with the topic, and to spark an interest in the audience to look up for resources to understand RL after this talk. Moreover, reinforcement learning or RL is a math-heavy topic, and it is difficult to not include boring mathematical expressions while explaining some of the topics. I tried to avoid them as much as possible and used it only when absolutely necessary. So I guess you can bear me in that part. And also, I expect this talk to be very interactive. I'm expecting a lot of questions from the audience. And as I stated earlier, I'll try to make it as illustrative as possible by giving as many examples in order to digest the concepts. So now, what is reinforcement learning? Let me first catch your attention with the help of the following video. In fact, there are two videos, so let me first play this video. So what you see here is an algorithm by a company called DeepMind. And the task here is to teach this robot how to walk or how to run or how to crawl in different, as you will see in the later in the video. So the stick figures here move because the algorithm applies a certain amount of torque in the joints of the stick figure. Now, when you apply a torque, that automatically makes the stick figure to move forward or backward accordingly. Now, the how we train the algorithm in order to achieve this is what that we'll discuss in the rest of the talk. But let's now look at some cases where the algorithm will perform incredibly well or where it will fail. So as you observe here, the robot is using its hands in order to change the momentum when it needs to turn when it finds an obstacle. That is interesting. That is something what humans do when we are running and trying to change our direction. Of course, it behaves much more weirdly. So I think in this video, you were able to gain some insight on what reinforcement learning does, which we will discuss further in detail. But here, the algorithm is basically trying to teach a certain behavior to the agent with the help of some experiences. Now let's go to the next video. And I find this video particularly interesting because these are two cars which are trying to park in a single parking lot. And both the cars are trained with the same algorithm, but you will see different behaviors from the cars and you'll see some interesting patterns when they try to park in that particular spot. So here you see some violent behavior by the vehicles in order to secure the parking spot, which is not what you see in the real world, however. So let's move forward. Yeah, so I hope that I have your attention now, and that you're more curious than the beginning of the talk in order to learn or in order to understand reinforcement learning better. So now to explain what is happening, what has happened so far, I will try to provide two views of reinforcement learning. But before that, let me turn on another poll. So the first view is regarding the learning paradigm. So in this poll, let's try to see if you can, if you know the difference between these paradigms. So let's open the next poll. Okay. How
So
do
you
I?
will have to activate the second poll.
Oh, okay. Let me see.
There's an
Back.
arrow map.
Got it. Got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I activated the second poll. Okay, I see around 70% of them voted. So yeah, I think some of the audience are familiar with supervised learning and unsupervised learning, and most of them are not. So let me try to explain the difference. So I'm ending the poll now. So okay. So in supervised learning, the objective is to learn a relation between the input data and the target output data, which is also called as label data. So generally problems that involve classification or regression fall under this category. For example, classification in the sense you would have seen famous examples of of an algorithm that classifies an image as a cat or a dog. So in that case, the algorithm has access to data, say for example, images of animals, and labels which say that this particular image is cat or this particular image is dog. Using this data, the algorithm tries to identify or classify if a new image is given, whether the image belongs to that of a cat or to that of a dog. Similarly, for regression, you would have looked at some popular examples of regression, such as housing price prediction, or temperature or climate prediction, etc. In these cases, you have data of a certain quantity over a period of time, and then you want to predict what the value of that particular um, event or object is going to be at a future time. So this is a regression problem. So in these cases, there is availability of label data where you have, say, this is like a ground truth label, which was experienced from the past. Some popular algorithms that do supervised learning are least squares, logistic regression, decision trees, neural networks, or any deep learning algorithm that you look at which uses labels. They're all supervised learning algorithms. And some applications which actually use supervised learning are spam classification, fault detection in machines, and so on. So they are all supervised learning techniques. The other category that you see here is the unsupervised learning. In unsupervised learning, there is no availability of labeled data. For example, you take your Pixel phone or any Android phone which uses Google Photos. You take a selfie, and then your photo is shown on your photo is stored on your phone. Now, when Google tries to run algorithms to process your data better, for example, you can search your photo with your name on your phone. But for that, Google does not know that, say, Jayant is this photo or someone else is this photo. In order to do that, you need label data. So sometimes sometimes you get notifications asking if this person is the same as this person. So that is how they try to gain label data. But when such label data is not available, you can't make a prediction or you can't make a classification. At best, you can summarize the data that is available. And that part of summarization comes under the unsupervised learning paradigm, where a simple example is clustering. Given some amount of data, you can say that these 10 examples belong to cluster 1, these 15 example belongs to cluster 2, and so on. So that is one example of unsupervised learning. And the other examples are dimensionality reduction, principal component analysis, and so on. And this is a widely researched topic in artificial intelligence and deep learning literature. Now, coming to the third category, which is reinforcement learning, which is the topic of today's discussion. In contrast to the other two categories, where the goal is to make a prediction or summarization only once when the input data is given. Say, for example, Google Photos or some other algorithm that classifies an image as a cat or a dog, and that's it. It does it once, and there are no consequences of that decision, or that decision does not impact future data, and so on. However, on the other hand, reinforcement learning deals with sequential decision making. By sequential decision making, what I mean is the algorithm sees some input, takes an action, and then that action modifies the input for the next time step. So you have to take that into consideration before choosing the action. So that is called sequential decision making, where in reinforcement learning, you do sequential decision making, and the objective is to maximize a particular reward or minimize a particular cost function, because that is how you try to optimize something. RL is currently a very hot topic in AI, and it has found some recent successes, as you've seen in the earlier examples, in robotics or in game playing, and so on. If you are aware, in 2016 or 2017, there was a game between a human player of Go, which is a Chinese game, and an algorithm from DeepMind. And the algorithm defeated the human players 4-1, I guess. So these are some recent successes of reinforcement learning. But of course, reinforcement learning is a young application when it comes to commercial applications, and it has a long way to go. So now I hope that we have some better understanding of how reinforcement learning differs from the usual supervised learning and unsupervised learning. Now, I'd like to illustrate it better, or even more. I would like to illustrate it in a way that it is more relevant to businesses. And this was done by a researcher called Ben Recht, and he used this infographic from Gartner. So this infographic shows three different categories of analytics. As you see, descriptive analytics, predictive analytics, and prescriptive analytics. So in descriptive analytics, you're trying to understand what happened using the data that is available. So basically, you're trying to gain some hindsight knowledge on what happened, and so that you can make better preparation for future. So in unsupervised learning, you try to summarize the data based on what is available. So that can be categorized under descriptive analytics. Now, this is a broad categorization, and this does not imply that unsupervised learning is not very valuable. Of course, unsupervised learning is very valuable in the sense that the outputs of unsupervised learning, such as the features that are learned, are used even in reinforcement learning or supervised learning. So that is not the matter of discussion here. This is only for illustrative purposes. So on the other hand, predictive analytics deals with making a prediction about a certain event from the available data. So as you observed, classification of a dog or a cat, you're making an insight from the available data, a particular prediction or a classification. Supervised learning procedures fit this category, where a classification or a regression output is given with when a input data is given. However, the consequence of the predictions are not factored into the learning approach. The prediction or the summarization, even in descriptive analytics, has a consequence. However, that consequence is not factored in the learning approach when the algorithm is trained. However, prescriptive analytics deals with that consequence. It tries to understand, or it tries to prescribe a set of actions so that you can make a particular target or a particular result achievable. This is more valuable than making just a prediction without factoring in the consequences. Therefore, it is more challenging, and it also offers more value to real-world applications. So if you looked at the parking example, you have, say, for example, there are two different algorithms. Say the first algorithm just classifies if there is an obstacle in front of the car, whereas the second algorithm is what you saw in the video, which suggests a steering angle and an acceleration so that the vehicle can avoid the target, avoid the obstacle in order to avoid any punishment. So this is the main difference between factoring in the consequence. Without factoring in the consequence, you can just classify it as an obstacle. But if you wrongly classify it as not an obstacle, you'll go straight and hit the obstacle, which leads to a damage. That is not factored into the learning approach. So that is the main difference there. So above we saw one viewpoint of RL, which is prescriptive analytics, and differentiating it with respect to descriptive or predictive analytics. Now let's look at a different viewpoint, which is from the control systems viewpoint. And this is a very traditional problem. You must be aware of quadraptors or quadrotors. The goal is basically the quadrotor lies on the ground, and then you take a particular control, or you train an algorithm such that the quadrotor lifts off from the ground and goes to a particular point, as you observe here. Now, how is this different from reinforcement learning? In reinforcement learning, if you saw from the videos, the car is trained to go and park in that particular parking spot. The robot is trained to jump from that cliff or walk or run, as you saw in the video. So the difference between this problem and the problems in the video is that here we know the dynamics of this particular problem. You know that Newton's law of gravitation acts on this particular quadrotor, and then using Newton's laws, you can devise what acceleration needs to be given in order to lift the quadrotor off the ground. And in order to give that acceleration, what is the velocity needed to be given to the motors such that you get that thrust. So all these dynamics are at least not exactly, but approximately known due to the physics of it. However, in the earlier problems, the dynamics are much more difficult to estimate. And in such cases, reinforcement learning takes a data-driven approach in order to solve that particular control task. Even that one is a control task, but here you have more assumptions about the model, more assumptions about the dynamics. But in the reinforcement learning case, usually such assumptions are not made, because the problems that reinforcement learning tries to target are much more complex and much more challenging, for which estimating such a model is not very feasible. So I will pause for a while for some questions because it's important that we understand the differentiation so far in order to proceed further. So I'll pause for 30 seconds if there are any questions, and then we'll proceed. I see some raised hands. How do I allow access? Okay.
Hello, sir.
I see. Yeah. Hey.
Good morning, sir. So my doubt is that so what's RL basically like? It's uh, like uh, like how parents learn from kids growing up or something like that, or it's that some goal-based model.
So, well, that's a very good question. Most of the algorithms that you try to develop are goal-based, but you don't know if the goal is correct. So you're designing an arbitrary reward or an arbitrary goal, in which case it's not clear if that goal is exactly the same as, say, for example, you might have one intuition on, say, this is the goal, but then the system might behave differently for that goal. So you cannot, it's an open problem in order to define what the actual reward or what the actual goal is. So that's a difficult question to answer. But what you're looking at is right in the sense that you're basically you set a goal for the agent, and then you give it some reward or some punishment based on whether it achieves that goal or whether it does not achieve the goal, and that feedback is propagated into the algorithm so that it can make use of those experiences while learning. I did not understand the first part that you said.
So yes, sir. You were saying that from an input the model will learn and the next time the input would be better so that it could learn get to its better version. So is it like I compared the situation with like parenting,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So in that case, cognitively in your mind, you
there are
have a
no
subjective.
consequences.
Sorry.
So that there are no consequences like if you like as you said, sir, the car is it's seeing the obstacle not as obstacle, so that there are consequences which is damage.
Yes.
So yes, sir. So RS is like what I mean, like how it is different from supervised learning.
Yeah. So in the supervised learning algorithm, you have a fixed training data set, right? So you try to learn using those data set, say that input and output mappings, to train, to classify or predict. But if you classify it wrongly, of course, there is a loss function which grows if you classify it wrongly. But your input data does not change if you classify it wrong. Whereas
Okay.
in reinforcement learning, your input, the next state that you see, is going to be completely affected by the current decisions that you take. For example, if the vehicle is in front of a pole and then you go straight and hit the pole,
Yes.
if you use a supervised learning algorithm, uh, you will probably say, for example, if the prediction there is to either go forward or go backward, it makes a move forward, but then the fixed data set that you have may not have the example where that pole was hit by the car earlier from that particular position. You
Okay.
see, the collection of the data set itself is adaptive to whatever action you're taking in reinforcement learning. Whereas in supervised learning, you have a fixed data set and you're trying to find a mapping from the input to the output.
Okay.
Got it? Do you now understand the difference better?
Yes, sir. Yes. Thank you.
Great question. Great question. And the next,
Good morning, sir.
hey, good morning.
Sir, my doubt is that what is reinforcement learning which makes it different from artificial learning? Are both same or different, sir? Is there any similarity or difference between them?
Can you please ask your question again? Your voice was breaking.
Okay.
Your voice was breaking. Can you please ask the question? Ask it again.
Yes, sir. Sir, am I audible now?
Yes.
Sir, my doubt was regarding what is the thing in reinforcement learning which makes it different from artificial learning? Because I'm able to find that almost both are similar. Is there a thing which makes it different from artificial learning, or both are similar?
What do you mean by artificial learning?
Artificial learning is we train a machine so that it can think by itself and perform actions based upon the environment.
I am not sure I've heard that term before, but if going by what you're saying, that's essentially what reinforcement learning is doing. Maybe that's another term that I'm not aware of. Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't answer that because I haven't heard the term artificial learning. Artificial intelligence is used as an umbrella term for all these machine learning algorithms, but I'm not sure if I know artificial learning. I think we can. Are there any more questions? Okay, so let's now proceed. Okay, that's good. Yeah, it's good that you're asking questions, so that helps clear the doubts of others also. So, in order to understand the problem better, let us take a look at the terminology. Basically, you see a state. So before explaining the problem in detail, it's important that we understand these terms: the state, action, environment, agent, reward, and transition kernel. Of these, in order to do that, we'll first try to look at some illustrative examples where we can easily find out what each term is, so that will help us better. So let's take this example of this mouse, which is hungry, and it needs to traverse this maze in order to reach its reward, which is the cheese. However, the mouse has to be careful so as to not fall for the mouse traps. So this is the example that we'll use throughout this section in order to illustrate the terminology. So as it's easy to observe, the agent here is the mouse, and the environment is the maze, which has the path from the source to the destination, and it has obstacles. So this definition of environment is slightly, I mean, just for illustrative purposes. It depends on the problem. Say, for example, one can consider the process of giving the rewards also to be part of the environment, but let's not deviate from the main topic, which is understanding this terminology. So the reward here is the cheese, or the punishment here is the mouse trap. And the most important concept that we need to understand is the concept of a state. A state is something that the agent can observe from its surroundings using whatever sensors the agent has access to. There may be states that are not observable or hidden. There may be states that are observable, but so for example, in this case, let us say that the mouse has is farsighted, so it can only see stuff which are very close by it. So the mouse can only see the immediate surroundings. Let us now divide this maze into a grid with small boxes that you see in yellow. So I only displayed five of these here, but assume that there are other boxes which I haven't filled. Now, if the mouse is farsighted, the mouse cannot see beyond, say, for example, the adjacent immediate boxes. It can only observe at max the 4 surrounding boxes if there are no obstacles. In this case, it cannot observe. If the mouse starts at S, it can only observe A and B. So there are cases where the mouse has a complete information about the state, or in some cases here it only has an incomplete information about the state. So the above construction of state space is arbitrary, which is only for illustrative purposes. There can be other ways to construct the state space, which we will not discuss here. Now, the other important aspect to consider is the action space. So what are we training the agent to do? We are training the agent to perform an action given some input state. So here, in order to traverse this maze, the mouse has to take a sequence of actions, which is right, left, up, or down. So basically, if the mouse is in one box, it moves from this box to the box next to it if it takes right, or to the box above it if it takes up, and so on. However, in some states, due to the obstacles, these walls, not all states are feasible, not all actions are feasible. The agent can only choose actions from the feasible set of actions. So if the mouse is here, it can only take up and right, but not down. Okay. So now that we looked at state, action, environment, agent, and reward, let us now look at the transition kernel. So this is slightly tricky. It's not as straightforward as the earlier terms. So let us look at what we have first. So the mouse is in the source, which is S, and it needs to go to the destination D. And the immediate adjacent states are A, B, and C, whereas C is not reachable from S directly because of the obstacle. So let us now first consider the case of deterministic transitions. So in deterministic transitions, if the agent decides to take an action, for example, up or right, it goes from the state S to the corresponding state A if action up is taken, and it goes to action state B if action right is taken. As you can observe, it cannot directly traverse to C. Maybe it can traverse by going through other states and then eventually reaching C. So the states that you see in the dotted circles here are states that we haven't shown in the earlier graph, so that the difference is made clear. So this, what you see here is a graph, and this graph traversal is a very classical problem that is studied in computer science. And there are several algorithms using dynamic programming or Dijkstra's algorithm that try to compute the shortest path. However, here's what we're looking at is the transition kernel. So previously what we looked at is deterministic transition case. Now let us look at stochastic transitions. What is a stochastic transition? So assume that the mouse is drunk. Even if the mouse wants to take action U, which is up, in its mind, in reality, with probability 0.8, it takes the action up. Whereas with probability 0.2, it takes the action right, which moves it to state B. Similarly, for every other action, it has a particular probability that it will misclassify or act because the mouse is probably lousy or drunk. So in this case, what you see is a stochastic transition. Given in this state and this particular action, there is a particular probability that the mouse can reach state A, or some other probability that the mouse can reach state B. Observe that the sum of the probabilities from each of these branches is equal to 1. Say 0.8 plus 0.2 is 1. And for this case, 0.4 and 0.6 is 1. And similarly for this case, and similarly for this case. So transition kernel is something that inherently manages or controls this transition from one state to the other state given an action. Suppose that the mouse is not drunk, but the environment itself is noisy in the sense that there is wind in the environment, wind in the maze, such that even if the mouse wants to go in one direction, it's pushed towards the other direction. So all these things are controlled by the transition kernel, which is a part of the environment. So now that we understood the terms, let us try to look at this important property, which is called the Markov property. So the reinforcement learning problem is studied formally under the notion of Markov decision processes, which use this particular Markov property. So what this property implies is that your future state is independent of the past states if you know your current state. That is, in this particular example, you are in a particular box in the maze at this current time step, and your dynamics of transitioning to a next state at the next time step is completely independent of how you reach the current point in the maze. So all you need to care about is your current state, and you don't and the dynamics basically do not depend on the future, on the history or the past. However, the algorithm can still take into consideration the past while making the actions, but the dynamics or the transition kernel itself does not depend on the past actions or the past trajectory or past route how you reach the current state. So now this brings us to the one slide which has all the boring, gory mathematical symbols. But this is
can I ask a question? I have a question.
Sure,
so
sure.
If we can go to the previous one before the Markov slide.
Okay.
Okay, here, you have been rewarding the cat with yes or no, or whenever it takes a positive route, you are rewarding it, and whenever it is doing what it is not supposed to do, you are giving it 0. So you always get right or wrong. So the probability is always 1 or 0. So how do we arrive at these different probabilities of 0.2, 0.6, all these?
Okay, I think I'll have to clarify something before that then. So the reward, so in general reinforcement learning problem, for every action taken, you will receive a reward at that instant. In this case, the reward in all the intermediate steps is 0, and the reward is 1 or say plus 100 when it reaches the destination, which is the cheese, and the reward is minus 100 if it reaches this particular mouse trap. So here the reward is received only at the end, and it's not received at every step. But the general RL problem, you get a reward for every action you take. So now that I should have clarified this earlier, but it's good that you brought it up. Now that this thing is, I clarified this part. Whatever I've written here is completely arbitrary, just for an illustration. This probability that you're seeing has nothing to do with the rewards, has nothing to do with say what has nothing to do with the rewards. All I'm saying here is, if the transition if there is wind in the maze, or if the mouse is drunk or lousy, even if it decides to take a particular action, it takes a wrong action with some non-zero probability. and these values are just as an illustration, and they don't mean anything. So does that answer your question?
Got it. But say a mouse can take hundreds of actions in a particular point of time. So at what point of time can we decide, which action has more probability for a mouse when compared to when we have these hundreds of actions?
So as we noted here, at each time step, the mouse has only 4 actions. So we defined the action set that at each time step, it can either move 1 step to the right, 1 step to the left, 1 step upwards, or 1 step downwards. So we have only 4 actions available here for the mouse, and the probability of so what you're asking is the probability of from S taking U or taking R. So that is what the learning algorithm will learn, the probability of taking a particular action in a particular state. This probability has nothing to do with what you're asking. This probability is a part of the environment itself, is a part of the transition kernel or the dynamics of the problem.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much.
All right. So do we have any other questions before we move forward regarding any of the terms in the terminology?
If you can please take a minute again for Markov.
Okay. Yeah. So is there any particular question, or do you want me to go over it again?
No particular question.
Okay. So, okay. For example, assume that you have to travel, say a particular agent has to travel from one place to another place, say one city to another city. And there is so the destination city has and you can only reach the destination city through some highway, through 3 or 4 highways, and there is one city on one of those highways which is closest to that particular city. So no matter how you reach that penultimate city, the action that you take in the future, or like from that last step. Okay, yeah, let me go back. Let's actually stick to the current example. Say the mouse is here. Okay, now the mouse has reached, say for example, this particular the mouse has reached this particular junction. Now the mouse can take 2 actions, which is up or which is right. So say for example, the mouse has chosen action up. So when the action is up, we expect that the mouse will go directly here. But due to the stochastic transition probability or the stochastic transition kernel, it might go here or it might go here with some probability because the environment is noisy. So how it transitions from this state to here or here is completely independent of how the mouse reach this place in the first. Do you see that? Now, do you understand when I say independence?
Yes.
So basically, you can start the mouse from this particular point and reach here, and there is a particular probability that it will go here or here. Now you take the mouse and directly drop it off in this place, and you'll have the same probability that if it takes the same action, it will go here or here with the same probability. So that is what I mean by saying that this entire path is independent. All that matters is the current state to determine the future state. So that is the property that's the Markov property, and that is used to define this problem in the framework of Markov decision processes. I hope I'm clear here.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Good. Yeah, I like that you're asking more questions, and this helps me also to explain it better so that everyone can understand. So now moving forward, this is a small illustration of what happens in the mathematical formalism. So basically, you have the environment and the agent. So what I did not define earlier is a policy pi, which is a function which takes the current input and outputs an action, which is from the action space. Now, you can say that there are different ways to define the policy. You can directly output a particular action, or you can output a probability distribution over a set of actions. So let's not get into that. Let's assume that for simplicity, it outputs a particular action. Now, the agent takes the current state xt and applies this particular policy and arrives at a particular action. So it takes the action, and then the environment responds to this action ut and outputs a next state xt plus 1, which depends on the transition probability kernel or the transition probability matrix. So it depends on both the state and the action taken. So this new state is now the current state of the agent in the next time step. At the same time, the environment also outputs a particular reward for taking this particular action in this state. So assume that the mouse is very close, is near the destination. It takes the right action to reach the cheese. It receives a positive reward, and the next state is the destination, which is the cheese. Now, the objective of reinforcement learning is to maximize the cumulative reward that the agent will accrue in its time period or in its lifespan. So here I also need to define another term, which is called the discount factor. Usually the objective that is maximized is a cumulative discounted reward, which is basically you multiply the reward by gamma power t. So since gamma is between 0 and 1, you are weighing each reward with this gamma power t. So this gamma power t gives a weight of how you should optimize your current reward as expected to the long-term future reward. So that balances the trade-off between should you look for immediate rewards or should you look for long-term future rewards. So this is the state diagram or the block diagram to explain reinforcement learning. Now, I think I should pause for another poll. Let me launch this poll now. So this basically tries to in this poll you will look at what is the principle that is used to learn. Say, for example, that can be used to train an agent in order to learn something. Okay, so I see that around 60% of them voted already. So let's move forward. So I'll publish the results. It's interesting that very few people chose option A, which is knowledge is ingrained in your mind. So actually, there is no correct answer for this. And it's a traditional dilemma called nature versus nurture, in the sense that it's not known if all these actions that are past generations of humans have learned, are they encoded in our genes, or do we learn them afresh when we come into this world by experience? So all three of them are partly correct. So I just wanted to get an understanding of what everyone thinks regarding this particular question. So this is, but what is also important is option C, which is try and fail repetitively. This is how algorithms learn, because you cannot encode all our human knowledge in a particular algorithm in a finite memory and finite state. So you let the algorithm try and fail repetitively, which is what the reinforcement learning paradigm uses. So let's now move forward to understand what is the learning principle. So as you basically experience the environment, observe someone else doing it, and then you try it yourself, and then you fail at the task, you do it repetitively, and then you eventually learn. So this is simple. This is similar to how you learn to walk as a kid, you learn to crawl. This is how you learn in a school. So this is basically how our human mind learns, along with some ingrained knowledge. But in order to do this with the algorithm, that is what reinforcement learning deals with. How do you enable this experience and the feedback from these experiences in order to train the algorithm to perform better? So actually, I'll show this one particular example, which is a very famous experiment in psychology. So this is called Skinner box. So Skinner box was an experiment that was performed in psychology on rats. So rats are exploratory creatures like us. So in Skinner box, basically you put a rat, you confine it, and then there are some buttons in the box for turning on the light, or some random buttons, and then there is a button for delivering food to the rat, which is inside the box. So the rat generally tries to walk around the box, and then eventually finds this particular button that will give it food, and then it starts pressing that button as long as it wants food. So this is what you observe here. It clicks that particular button, takes food from that hole, and goes back to that button, and then takes the food again. So this is what any animal or any algorithm, any human would do when they are particularly confined in a particular space. They try out different things to do whatever they can in that space, and then based on the rewards, they try to learn a specific behavior. So let's so yeah, there is another example about how the vehicle learned to park, but I think we are running out of time, so I'll avoid this one. I can share the link in the chat later. So essentially, you take experiences, you store all the experiences, and then process them in a way that you can encode that knowledge into the learning algorithm. So there are several solution approaches in order to do this. The most famous principle is called the Bellman optimality principle, which is also encountered in dynamic programming. If someone is from computer science and has done graph theory, they would have they might have been aware of dynamic programming and Bellman optimality. And there are other algorithms called policy gradients, which directly try to maximize the objective instead of going through the Bellman optimality principle. And there are algorithms that use a mixture of both the value-based approaches and the policy gradients. But Let's not go into detail about this because it'll take a lot of time, and then it requires a lot of mathematical expressions in order to explain that. So let us look at a simpler problem of reinforcement learning. So in reinforcement learning, we had this state, action, state transition. So in a particular state, and when you take an action, you transition to a next state. In multi-arm bandit, it is a simplified problem that you take a state, you are in a state, you take an action, and then the game ends there. There is no next state, but you get a reward. And the reward is basically giving you some feedback about that particular whatever game you play. And this can be done multiple times, like thousands of times. And then you eventually need to figure out what is the best action to take in order to get the best reward. So for example, assume that you went to a casino and then there's a slot machine. A slot machine is nothing but there are 10 different levers. You pull some lever randomly and then you get some reward. So basically you pay $10 or 10, like some ₹1,000 to pay to play that game. You pull one lever at random and then you get some gift card. You pull another lever and then you get a different gift card. So you're given 3 tries or 4 tries depending on the casino. So essentially in this multi-arm bandit, the goal is to pull the arm or pull the lever as it is called, such that you get the best expected reward. So let us play a small game to illustrate that better. So I'm turning on another poll. So what you see on the screen are 2 arms, A and B. Which one would you pick when you have absolutely no information about whether A is better or B is better? There is no correct answer in this. It's just anything at random. So pick whatever you feel is, pick whichever color you like, probably. Okay, so I see around roughly 60%. So let's close the poll in say 10 seconds because we have more such experiments to run. Okay, so I'm ending the poll. As anyone would expect, if you can see the results, it's roughly 45% arm A and 55% arm B. So you have no information about arm A and B. So you probably chose it at random. So you're roughly around 45%, 50%. Now, what if I tell you, that, for example, I ran the same experiment like what I just did. And for everyone who picked arm A, I gave a particular reward. And everyone who picked arm B, I gave another reward, which is not known earlier. You only get to know the reward after you choose the arm A and arm B. So for example, we repeated that experiment 5 times. And what you see here is the mean and standard deviation of the rewards for picking arm A and the mean and standard deviation for picking arm B. So in this case, So let me turn on the next poll. So now that you have some information about the system, what would you choose now? So imagine for everyone who picks ARM A, I'll give say $75 or on average with some variation around that. And for everyone who picks ARM B, I would give $65 with some variation around, say, for example, standard deviation of $25. So basically, try to think which one will give you the best money like return and choose based on that. So I see around roughly again 60% of them. So I will close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So let's end the poll. Now, as you see, let me share the result. So previously, we had 45% for ARM A and 55% for ARM B. Now we have 60% for ARM A and 40% for ARM B. Now, let me again give you another scenario. After this, you continued the same technique for 50 more trials, and then you have updated estimate about the mean and the updated estimate and the standard deviation for both the arms. So in this case, what would you choose again? The poll is on. So I'm seeing again 60% voting. I'll probably close the poll. Okay, I'll wait for some more responses. Okay, all right, let's stop the poll and let me share the results. So as you observe now, there is 70% for ARM A and 30% for ARM B. So people brace for an anticlimactic ending. After 500 trials, the estimates are as follows. What would you choose now? The poll is on.
Sir, you muted yourself. We can't hear you.
I'm sorry. I'm extremely sorry.
Yes, sir. After poll, what you have said, we didn't hear at all.
Okay, my bad. My bad. Let me repeat that. So basically, I was just filling in the tables so that I can visualize it better. So what I'm saying here is this is a classic example of exploration exploitation dilemma, which is a fundamental problem in reinforcement learning and also multi-arm bandits. So everyone who has chosen arm A in case 2 and case 3 tried to exploit whatever information that is given to them. So if you go back to case 2, which is 5 trials, and case 3, which is 50 trials. So you're seeing everyone who has chosen action A looked at the mean. The mean is higher than the mean for arm B. And then the standard deviation for arm A is slightly better, is also better than the standard deviation for arm B. So you've chosen arm A. So you try to exploit whatever information that is available to you based on, so you try to make a conservative estimate or a conservative bet on this giving a better reward. Now, everyone who has chosen arm B in case 2 and case 3, they try to explore more. When I say explore, so if you look at the case 2, you see that the mean is 65, but the standard deviation is 25. That means that you can get a reward of probably 90. You can get a reward of probably less than 40. All that is possible, but there is uncertainty. So everyone who has chosen B tried to make use of that uncertainty in order to search for better rewards, assuming that they're optimistic that this arm will give a better reward because you haven't seen enough examples to explain it correctly. 5 examples is a very small number. So what they did there is exploration, and what people who chose arm A did was exploitation. You use the information that you have currently and you exploit that. So this is traditionally, I mean, the example that I have here is slightly different from what the multi-arm bandit examples would do, but this was just for illustration. You don't have to fix to this particular example. Now, after 500 trials, now you made sufficient progress on arm B. You see that the mean of arm B has grown to 83 because you saw enough examples and the standard deviation also shrank. So more people actually chose arm B than arm A in the last case. So you tried to exploit whatever new information you got. So this is what exploitation is. So the principle that is used to the one algorithm that is widely used in multi-arm bandits is called UCB, which follows this principle of optimism in the face of uncertainty. So when your rewards are uncertain, you try to be optimistic and then take that action rather than exploiting whatever you have already. You try to be more exploratory. So that algorithm basically tries to for each arm you would have number of trials. So in this example, we chose the number of trials to be equal for both of them, but for the actual algorithm you would have different say after 500 trials you would have 200 trials where arm A was picked and you get this particular statistics, and arm B was picked say a different number of times, and based on that the algorithm chooses the probability of choosing arm A or arm B in the next time when it plays. So that is the exploration exploitation dilemma. And now let's quickly glance through the applications of these particular algorithms or the multi-arm bandit frameworks. So you would have heard about A/B testing. So this is a traditional technique in order to test whether a particular website design or an app design is good. So they randomly select a population and then they show this variant of the design to those people. And based on that, they evaluate whether the revenue or the clicks of that website has increased or decreased in order to get a feedback of the design, whether it is good or not. And then they implement the design on everyone. So that is A/B testing. But A/B testing has some drawbacks which multi-arm bandits solve. Basically, the exploration exploitation. How long do you need to show a particular design variant? How long can you keep switching the designs? So all of those things can be done more efficiently than A/B testing by using multi-arm bandits. The second example is recommendation systems. So, for example, you want to watch a movie, you logged into Netflix. So you signed up for the first time, and you don't know Netflix has no data about you in order to show you or recommend any particular movie to you. So what Netflix does is randomly show you different movies, and whether you like it or dislike it. If you like it, basically Netflix remembers that particular feedback and then tries to show more of the same to you. So in that case, Netflix is the agent, you are the environment, and different movies are the different arms that Netflix will pull for a particular user. And similarly, online advertising. Online advertising also uses your information to show what ads are better suitable to you. If you are a kid, there is no use showing ads about some elderly people to kids. So they're basically wasting the ad space. In order to optimize that better, multi-arm bandits are also useful in that particular application. Now, the full RL problem is much more challenging and much more difficult, but also offers much more value in terms of the applications that it can actually find a real world case for. So the first one is interventive healthcare. So, for example, there is a patient who goes to a doctor for a particular illness. The doctor can prescribe a sequence of techniques or interventions. Say the doctor may first say ask to perform exercises and then go to a therapy and then take a test and then take an operation depending on the test results. But now when a new patient comes, the doctor may probably suggest medication first and then a test instead of doing all the exercise and therapy, and then an operation. So the objective here is to minimize the number of interventions and the best way to optimize for the good health. So that is interventive healthcare. So all of these RL algorithms are currently nowhere near reaching healthcare application in the real world, but this is something that it can find a possible use in the future. One use that RL is currently finding in the real world is Google data center cooling. So Google has these huge data centers and they get heated up very fast because of all the computation. Now, DeepMind developed some algorithms where they can optimize the cooling, optimize the electricity expenditure in order to cool these data centers in a much more efficient way. So they use some sort of reinforcement learning algorithms for that. And other applications where RL can find a place in is industry automation, basically robots that do all the industrial automation of picking and placing objects, packing stuff, and so on. And also inventory management. Basically, inventory management is another difficult problem that cannot be directly solved with RL, but it has some good scope. And all of these, as I noted earlier, RL is an emerging technology, and there are a wide scope of applications that can be that are applicable, that can be used with RL, but it takes time. It probably 5 years, 10 years, we never know. But it's a very cool technology that many big companies are working on at the moment. So now, in order to understand RL or in order to work on RL, one needs to have a slightly more mathematical background in order to get the complete understanding of that. So as with any other analytics topics, you need coding and Python knowledge. In addition to that, you need to understand probability, linear algebra, and some basics of machine learning. And above all, it is the curiosity to learn more that can help you master any subject. And there are currently RL in the industry is mostly focused on research positions where they come up with efficient algorithms for some particular use cases, like the Google data center cooling. But in the future, there are much more viable options for reinforcement learning career options, which which has a wide range of possibilities, such as a research engineer, a software engineer, a data scientist, and so on. All of these particular roles can contribute to the actual RL problem in some or the other way. So there are so many big companies that are currently hiring for reinforcement learning. There are so many companies that are spending huge on RL, betting that it will go big in the next 10 years. I listed some of them here, but there are much more of them. And finally, our mouse reached its cheese. It got its reward. And before we have any Q&A, let me open the final poll, which is mostly about an evaluation of myself, about your experience with this talk. Okay, so I see around 60% again. So yeah, I think there is one person who just woke up. So at least I was
Sure,
at
that
least
is
used to.
Raj, Jayant. I'm sure that is
Probably. Yeah. And yeah, thanks a lot. I'll take this feedback and I'll try to improve my presentation for the next time. But I'm glad that many people loved it. I was able to reach your expectations. So I'm open for Q&A now.
So for the Q&A, I'm gonna enable the chat box. Students, make sure
Okay.
you type sensible questions that will be helpful for everyone.
Okay.
Just give me a second.
Meanwhile, I have a question, Jayant. So,
Yes.
I mean, like you are trying to make a car, say, and then most possibly the decisions will be whether it is exploratory or exploitative. So, for both of those things, probably the decision should be most probably same. But say, for example, I'm making a robo for the decision of playing of gambling. So some people will be risk taking and some people will be very safe. So for some people the a decision whatever you showed, right, mean, and so a part will be right for some people, b part will be right. So how do you make the difference?
Exactly. So that's a very good point that you touched on. So it's inherently, basically, it's the risk, how risk sensitive a particular agent is. That is what defines whether you're going to choose A or you're going to choose B. So, but in general, when you're training algorithms, say for example, if it is a application such as online advertising, um, if you choose a much say for example the conservative option, which is A, over a long period of horizon, say in the initial periods you will probably experience a slightly better returns, but on a longer horizon, say for example you do it for over 1,000,000 times, you particularly choose say B, on average will get a better return for B, because the mean for B is slightly more than for A. So as I said, the example there was a toy example, but what actually happens in a multi-arm bandit application is much more different. So the objective in these algorithms, in these applications, say for example, online advertising, or even a recommendation system or A/B testing, is to maximize these returns over a long period of horizon. So, and the risk that they have with respect to that is minimal, in the sense that uh, over a long period of horizon, what you're gaining by choosing the optimal action, say by choosing the pessimistic option in the beginning and exploring, is much more beneficial as compared to the risk sensitive nature of the agent. So those things are taken into consideration while designing the algorithms. So the algorithm has some parameters which can be changed, so that we can tune whether it is exploratory or exploitative. So those things are hyperparameters that you need to choose. So that depends on the application. If your application demands long-term returns, you probably are more exploratory in the beginning and then exploit that information later. But if your algorithm needs much more immediate rewards, if the duration is not long enough, you probably want to exploit whatever information you have. So it mostly varies with the application. Does that answer the question?
Yes, yes. Thank you so much.
Right, yeah, thanks.
So another question is actually so for a lot of machine learning, at least I'm seeing our guys doing lots of projects related to machine learning, and there are already predefined algorithms available in the internet. They have already trained these algorithms and they are available. Even for reinforcement learning, do we have trained algorithms?
So there are I mean there are so many GitHub pages where these algorithms are pre-trained, or the code for the algorithms is already available. So for training RL algorithms is slightly more challenging or difficult as compared to other supervised learning algorithms, because the data set is not fixed. So the interactions between the agent and the environment are collected using some simulator. Say for example, in the video that you saw, the walking robot was actually a simulation. There is a simulator where there is a stick figure which is in the shape of a humanoid robot, and the algorithm interfaces with the simulator, and then you make them choose actions, save the feedback, and then learn based on that. So there is a website called OpenAI Gym, which has all these environments, some of these environments available for use for educational purposes. But most simulators are actually proprietary. So very good simulators are usually proprietary, and it's very, expensive. But there are some open source simulators that one can use in order to directly implement some of these algorithms. But one thing is, whatever algorithms you have, those are for, like, say, some particular simulators that are available. But for real world tasks, the data collection process itself is very challenging, that you probably will not find any pre-trained algorithm for real world applications. And even if there is any, that won't be applicable for other cases that are different from what it was trained for.
Sure. Just for the learning purpose is what I asked.
Yes, yes. So you can look at OpenAI Gym. I'll message that in the chat box so that everyone can take a look at it. OpenAI Gym has these simulators, and there are tutorials that can help them get started with training some RL algorithms.
Okay, so this is out of the topic. One question for the students. So if because you are now pursuing your PhD in Ohio University. So for students who would like to do higher education in US, what do you suggest? Is it right time, or can you suggest what's the education scenario in US?
I think with the pandemic, it's currently very uncertain in the sense that, at least in the US, it's opening up bit by bit. So I'm expecting they are going to take students for fall, like with in-person classes. At least that is the expectation. With respect to the market, some job, say for example, some fields have ramped up hiring, but not all fields have ramped up hiring. So immediate effect on job opportunities is very uncertain. So yeah, what I can say at the moment is, uh, at least, I mean, with the pandemic, it's completely difficult to come to a conclusion whether it's a good idea to come here for studying now or not. But I think with all the online resources, most of the universities have made their course content, or for example, lectures, even video lectures, online. So that is still useful to like train ourselves during this time. But regarding coming over for a PhD or a master's, I think it's better to wait and see until the situation gets normalized.
Okay, thank you so much. Those questions from my side. Students, any other questions?
So I have 3 questions. So one is, I'm studying at local engineering college. I have dream of doing MS in top universities, but I'm earning certifications. Have certifications in my resume. But earning certifications in my resume help a good seat apart from score. So certifications will make your resume look good, but it's better that you pursue some open source projects. Say for example, look at any of these open source implementations of these algorithms. Try to build something with that, and then put your code online, so that you have a good project to show for your resume. I think universities value this more than I mean, of course, score, certifications, courses, GPA, all of them do matter. I'm not saying that they don't matter, but from what I saw, say for example, if you look at Coursera certifications, Udacity, there are several certifications which can help you get started with machine learning. But everyone does these certifications. To stand out from the rest of the crowd, you probably need to put more effort, such as doing your projects on your own and put them online, so that you can get the extra push into the admissions, like whenever someone is looking at your resume for admissions. And the next question is, so what should be done to the model to achieve its goal or task? Suppose, say, I need to detect the traffic and take shots of the vehicles who breaks the rules. Hariharan, I think, asked this question. Can you please elaborate a little more on the question? Is there a way to unmute Hariharan?
Oh, yes, sir, I'll do that.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, sir. What my question is that, I mean, like, yeah, what software, or how to create a model so that through cameras, like, we can sense a particular vehicle, like, suppose it's the red light, like, it's red light and someone just crossed uh, the traffic,
How to
and
track, how to
yeah,
track violations?
yeah,
Okay. Yeah, so I think such systems are already in place in some countries. So you can use any image processing toolkit. Say, for example, OpenCV is one way to do that. There may be other ways, other implementations of these computer vision algorithms that can say understand the scene, look at vehicles that cross the red light. Say you would require a lot of computer
Data.
vision approaches. Yes, I mean, of course, you have data to train that. Manually, you probably label some or a lot of past
So,
experiences, past data, and then
so
learn from.
yes, sir. So like, what should be done here? So like, to train a model, suppose say we'll take a 30 minutes video of traffic from that pole, that camera, and
Mhm.
we divide the pictures, and should we like annotate or
Yes.
key points and stuff
Yes.
like
So
that?
when you essentially want to find out who violates it, you need some manual annotations in order to find out what's the good behavior and what's the bad behavior in order to train your model. I mean, you can do that. There may be unsupervised ways to do that, but it's going to be much more difficult. Uh, like a manual annotation is probably the most straightforward way to train a model in order to do what you're saying.
So what's the process, sir? Like, where should we begin with to create such model?
Well, so basically, you need to have a. I mean, you need to have data like a video stream, and assuming you have that, um, there are some deep learning algorithms, deep learning models that can detect objects in a particular scene. You take that particular object. Say, for example, a particular scene has 100 objects. Now you don't know whether a particular object is violating a rule, say for example a car is violating a rule or not. So you need to annotate each and every possible type of like say behavior. Say there is a frame, and then all cars are probably um, waiting behind the behind the line for a stop sign or a red light. Now then there is another frame where there is a red light, but then there is a vehicle which has crossed the line and still moving, which you can find from its neighboring frames. So you need to manually annotate these frames together in order to
Gain accuracy.
sorry.
In order to gain accuracy on
Yes,
who's
yes, of
violating
course.
or not.
I mean, you have to pass that insight that this is a bad behavior to the model. So that's the labeling part of it. And once you do that, there are other challenges such as how do you tune your hyperparameters and all of these things, which is a whole different problem. But I guess you have an idea of what I'm talking about.
Yes, sir. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. So another question from Harsha. Do the algorithms developed previously require a tune-up, or new ones based on those are built from scratch for real-world applications? Yes, that's a very good question. And that's actually a very challenging problem in the sense that whatever algorithm that you've trained using past data might be optimal only for that data. So whatever hyperparameters that you used for training a particular algorithm, uh, they might they might be performing well for the data that you collected. Even if your environment slightly changes a bit for your future application, which is very much the case in real world applications, in such scenarios what you see is your hyperparameters don't translate very good performance on test in the test environment. So in such cases, you need to slightly tune your hyperparameters. You need some manual intervention to tune them, and that's still a very open problem. How do you tune hyperparameters for reinforcement learning for real-world applications? So that's a very open question, and that's a good question actually, Harsha. But it's something that I don't have an answer to at the moment. You definitely need tune up, but how do you do that is an open question. All right, so I think that's these are the questions I have in the chat. So
Okay. So Jayant, thank you so much actually and I've seen the lot of hard work that you have put in the slides to explain this, and the way you have explained with the help of the polls itself is really beautiful. Thank you so much. I have
Great. Yeah,
learned
thank you.
personally a lot. I'm sure the students have learned too. Thank you so much once again.
Yeah, thanks a lot for inviting me, and good luck to everyone.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you so much for the coming.
Thank you.
Students, I request you to please fill in the feedback form so that sir also understands like how much you understood about the session. So don't forget, please check the chat box. I've shared the link to the feedback form. And thank you so much, sir, for joining in.